Okay, so welcome everyone to another episode of the JPN podcast. We want to thank Rabbi Shimmy Steinmetz again for joining us this evening. Rabbi Steinmetz is the Rav of Kehillat Birkas Shmuel, the Albert Einstein Synagogue. Rabbi Steinmetz has lectured widely on topics relating to medical halacha, among others, all of which can be found at YU Torah. And tonight's shir is titled "Working on the Floor, Sitting on the Floor: Balancing Patient Care with Hilchos Avelis." And Rabbi Steinmetz is going to be discussing various questions and challenges that may arise in the healthcare setting on the fast of Tisha B'Av. And then we're going to ask if anyone has any questions. I guess we can leave them in the chat during the presentation, during the share, and then I guess we'll do questions, Q&A, questions and answers after the share is over. Rabbi Steinmetz, you are good to go.
Thank you again for having me back. It's good for my ego. I'm going to share the screen. So I can share. And then, so give me 1 second. I did this last time also, and I'm going to remember how to do it. I think the bottom. No, maybe. No. Second. If anyone wants to help, you're welcome to.
I think it's the button on the bottom. There's a little like screen button, right, where the button you just pressed next to it. Yeah, that one.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, good. Thank you. Say only 45 seconds this time. Last time it was a lot longer. Okay. So thank you again for having me back. Obviously, this is an important topic to discuss. And as we mentioned last time also, just to be aware of that, most of these, the point of this year tonight is so people know what questions to ask, not necessarily to get the answers to the questions they have, but to grasp some of some, not all, obviously. We're going to discuss a few of the issues that arise. And kind of where it comes from in the halacha, and then people will know either to ask or maybe they'll know what to do. But this isn't, nothing here is meant to be as just psak. Okay, so we mentioned the last time we spoke that what the 4 fasts that Zechariah discusses. So the Gemara in Hoshana Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis tells us that there's something unique to them that obviously it comes from a Navi, which means that the fast days themselves, the 4 of them, are considered divrei Kabbalah, right? It's not midoreisa, it's not midrabanan, it's somewhere like in between that, what we call divrei Kabbalah. And the thing that's probably the most interesting is once the Gemara has this inherent contradiction, which we mentioned last time, and trying to figure out what exactly these days are meant to be. So the Gemara says that if you look in the third to last line, right? This is how you explain the contradiction. Again, the contradiction we're not going to discuss again. When it's a time period of peace, of shalom, what we refer to as binyan beis hamikdash, at least according to some Rishonim. So then these days are meant to be a yontif. Yesh shmad, if there's a shmad or gzeres hamachos, if there's a government that's trying to convert us, Rahman al-Itzlan, so then it becomes a tzom. It turns into a fast day again, midivrei Kabbalah. Ein shman ve'ein shalom. If it's this in-between stage, which is what we are, bizmanenu, right now, where there's no government, Baruch Hashem, forcing us to convert on one hand, but on the other hand, things aren't the way they're supposed to be. We don't have a Beis HaMikdash, etc. So the Gemara tells us about these fasts, ratu misanin, ratu einin misanin, that if we want, we fast. If we don't want, we don't fast. And as the Rishonim already point out, and the Torah brings down, that nowadays we accept it upon ourselves to fast. So it's a Kabbalah Hatzibor, as we mentioned last week, to fast on these days. But the next line of the Gemara is what we didn't mention last time. The Gemara says, Ihachi, if this is true, Tisha B'Av Nami. So Tisha B'Av is one of these 4 fast days. So Tisha B'Av should also be included in this, in meaning Ratu Misanin, Ratu She'ein Misanin, that we shouldn't have to fast on Tisha B'Av, theoretically, Me'ikar Adin. The Gemara responds, Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa answers, no, you're right. The other fast days, there's reason to say Ratu Misanin, Ratu Ein Misanin, but there's something unique about the 4th one. Although the other 3, they're all the same, the 4th one is different. Why is it unique? Shiny Tisha B'Av Hol v'Huchbulu Bo Tsaros. Tisha B'Av is different because it's doubled in tsaros. It has increasing tsaros. What that means, both quantitatively and qualitatively, as Tosfos point out, it's just more intense tsaros, as we're all aware of. Both Bate Mikdashos, to say the biggest of the tsaros, were destroyed on this day. That's what we commemorate on Tisha B'Av. And because of that, Tisha B'Av is unique. Tisha B'Av is different. Now, the question is, which was already raised by the Achronim, the Aruch LaNer, the great German Achron in the 19th century of Yaakov Edlinger, right, has a suffix. And he says, what exactly is the maskana of the Gemara? What's the maskana of Rav Papa here? Again, Rav Papa tells us Tisha B'Av is different in that it's qualitatively, quantitatively worse. It has harder tsaros, more intense tsaros. And therefore what? So on one hand, you could have said, because Shiny Tisha B'Av, therefore, we don't consider it like the other three fast days. And really, it goes back into the way it originally was intended, which was it's part of that pasuk of Tzom HaRevi, Tzom HaChamishi, Tzom HaShviv, Tzom HaAsiri, Leves Yehuda, Lesatzon L'Simcha, etc. So that pasuk, which again is binding me divrei Kabbalah from the Navi, so that's what we're trying to say, that even though the three other fast days nowadays, if we want, we can fast. If we don't want, we don't fast. Yes, we accepted it as a Kabbalah Zatzibor, but that's really what they are. It's just midrabanan. But Tisha B'Av is unique because it's so intense. Really, it is not midrabanan. It really retains its status of midivrei Kabbalah that it originally had. That's one way of looking at it. The Aruch LaNer says the other way to look at it is no. Really, what the Gemara is just saying is that Tisha B'Av is like all the other fast days. It's like Shavuos or B'Tammuz. It's like Atzar B'Tevis and Tzom Gedalia. They're all the same. But the reason why we're more serious about Tisha B'Av is we're just more machmir about it. We're more stringent about it because of the stringent nature of Tisha B'Av itself. And the Aruch LaNer points out that this is actually a machlokas in the Rishonim. If you look at Rashi in Megillah Daf Hey Amud Aleph, I quoted here. I quoted the end of that Rashi. We're not going to discuss what the Rashi is talking about. But Rashi here writes, Mishum dehuchbulu v'tzaros v'akol misanim bo. Aval shar tzomos amrin b'mesechas Rosh Hashanah ratzu misanim ratzu ein misanim. What Rashi clearly says is that Tisha B'Av is not included in that line of ratzu misanin, ratzu ein misanin. Tisha B'Av is not included in the category of if we want, we can fast. If we want, we don't have to fast. Nowadays, it's just binding midrabanan. It really goes back to the status of midivrei Kabbalah, and it retains that status. And it is always midivrei Kabbalah. That's the opinion of Rashi, the first way the Aruch LaNer understood. The second opinion, the second of the Rishonim, the second way of looking at it, comes from the Rambam. The Rambam Menachas Ta'aniyos in Perek Hey Halacha Dalid seems to equate, at least the way the Beis Yosef at the beginning of Taf Kuf Nun Aleph and other Achronim later point out, but the Rambam seems to equate all four fast days, which makes it seem that once three of the fast days are in the category of midrabanan, as we pointed out again last week, Ratzu Misanin, Ratzu Eina Misanin, that we accepted upon ourselves as a tzibor. So once that's true, it's also true by Tisha B'Av. And Rav Papa is just coming to say the reason why we treat it differently is because the tzaros were more intensified qualitatively and quantitatively. And that's, again, a machlokas between Rashi on one hand, what I put here, and the Rambam in the fifth paragraph of Hilchos Ta'aniyos. Now, there are several nafkamina between the two. Maybe we'll only discuss two or three, depending on what time. But the first one, for example, the Bach writes in Simin Taf Kuf Nun Dalid. He quotes from the Ramban that in general, when there's, let's say, the fast day of Yom Kippur, for example. So if you have a sick person on Yom Kippur, so we assess the sick person to see how sick are they. Right? Can they fast? Do they need shiurim, or they're not allowed to fast? And we have to go to the doctors and say, what exactly is the sickness of this person? And we have to rely on the expertise of the doctors there. The Ramban, the way the Bach understands it, says, however, when it comes to Tisha B'Av, we don't do an Amida. We don't have to assess that person. As long as we know a person is not feeling well, so that person is now sick. B'makom choli lo gazru be'Rabbanan. And the Gzer Rabbanon to have the fast day of Tisha B'Av was not included, was not intended to include sick people, any type of choli. So if you were sick, we don't have to assess how sick are you. Once you're sick, you don't have to fast. That's the opinion of the Ramban. The Bach is assuming, like the Rambam, that Tisha B'Av is not midivrei Kabbalah, it is midrabanan. And therefore, we can rely on b'makom choli lo gazru be'Rabbanan, again, something we spoke about last time a lot, but it's at the status of the other three fast days, in that it is only midrabanan, and we can apply the rule of makom choli lo gazru be'Rabbanan. If we really held like Rashi, that this whole thing is midivrei Kabbalah, then we don't say b'makom choli lo gazru. There's no gzera here. It's not midrabanan. It's midivrei Kabbalah. So we would have to assess how sick the person is. Another, just a quick example, the Gemara in Pesachim on Dalet Amud is really the Mishnah there tells us that on Tisha B'Av there's also a minhag not to work. There's no asiyas malacha, whatever asiyas malacha includes, but there's an isra asiyas malacha, minhag not to do malacha on Tisha B'Av day. It's before Chatzos, but the Mishnah just says the day. But the Mishnah tells us some places there was no minhag and you're allowed to go to work. However, if you're Talmud Chacham, the Mishnah tells us then there's an isra malacha. You shouldn't do malacha on Tisha B'Av day. So the Achronim, the Pnei Yoshua there already brings up, how can you be mechalik the two? If you have a fast they call Tisha B'Av, and it's B'divrei Kabbalah, and part of Tisha B'Av is that you're not allowed to work. So what does that mean? Sometimes you are allowed to work, sometimes you're not allowed to work. Either you are or you're not. So the Pnei Yoshua explains, and the Minchas Chinuch and Mitzvah Shinalef also brings this up, and he says no, because the whole thing is Midrabanan, like all the other fast days. So once it's on a level of Midrabanan, so the Rabbanan distinguish between a Talmud Chacham and other people. But you can only say that, you can only assume that if you assume the position of the Rambam that we mentioned before, that really Tisha B'Av is the same, has the same chiyuv. The obligation is the same as Shivasa B'Tammuz. It's Midrabanan nowadays, at least, and not Midivrei Kabbalah, because if it was Midivrei Kabbalah, it would be much harder to distinguish between the two. There are other nafkamina, maybe we'll get to at the end, but I don't want to take up too much time. Okay. I'll go upon him. Nevertheless, whatever way, whether you look at Rashi, whether you look at the Rambam, obviously, Shiny Tisha B'Av, Ha'al V'Huchbalu Wutzaros. There's obviously something unique to Tisha B'Av in that we're more stringent on the day. So, for example, we know Tisha B'Av is a fast day like Shavas or B'Tammuz, but there are differences. For example, if you look at the second source I brought here in Siman Tov Kufnu and Dalin and Sifei, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Ubros Ominikos Misanos B'Tisha B'Av, Kederech Shemisanos Mashlimos B'Yom Kippur. We equate Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur in terms of pregnant women and nursing women, they really are supposed to fast, again, all things being equal. As opposed to, again, this is the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, as opposed to the other 3 fast days. Again, the Ramah says maybe different, but at least in terms of the Mechaber. So we already see that there's something unique about the fast day because, again, as we mentioned before, Shiny Tisha B'Av Ha'al V'Huchbalu Bo Tzaros. Okay, so then what happens if you're a doctor and you're on the floor and you need to deal with patients? What do? So we mentioned last week, and we'll just mention it once again, that Shlomo Zalman is quoted as giving the following psak. This you can find the source in the Sefer Alichos Shlomo when he's discussing the Ta'anios in the 13th parak, there in one of the footnotes, in footnote 12. So they write that there were times where Shlomo Zalman felt it was necessary and it was okay, and he paskined that certain doctors shouldn't fast even on Tisha B'Av if they're dealing with surgeries and things similar. And that was a psak Shlomo Zalman gave, not, again, b'derech klal, not to everyone, but he gave certain doctors that psak that even on Tisha B'Av, again, we mentioned this about Shavas or B'Tammuz, but even on Tisha B'Av, he said such a thing. It happens to be, Rav Asher Weiss was where my parents live a few days ago, so I asked my father to ask him. I wanted to hear how he formulated. I wanted him to answer this question just to see how he would formulate it. And the way my father told it to me is that he said, Rav Asher Weiss said that doctors who are dealing, and nurses who are dealing with acute illnesses, they're dealing with surgeries, patients that are in serious danger, and those doctors, those nurses need their strength and need a clear mind. So for those people, he felt that they are not allowed to fast, that they really should not be fasting, and then they should be eating. My father happily followed up with the question, so again, firstly, that does not mean all doctors. Obviously, as we mentioned last week, it just means depending on your specialty. If you're going to be dealing with patients and you need to be as sharp as you possibly can be and as strong as you possibly can be, then Reb Shlomo Zalman's psak would seem to apply. But if you're not, and theoretically you can go a day with fasting and it wouldn't be any issue, so then his psak may not apply. So that's not a psak for everyone, but certain categories, obviously it seems to be both Rav Shlomo Zalman and the way Rav Asher Weiss understood also is that, these people should not be fasting. Again, the follow-up question that my father asked is, what about, does that mean that they can start eating when they wake up in the morning? Or does it mean that they know they're doing a surgery at 2 p.m.? So at, lunchtime or whatever, they'll eat a little bit to get their strength for the rest of the day. Or can they already eat breakfast in the morning? So from what was told over to me, Rav Asher Weiss said, it's a good question. I don't know the answer. I don't know if he was trying to push it out. I don't know I don't think we can assume that he doesn't know. as much as he didn't want to say. But that was the answer. So as we pointed out last week, also this is dependent on a few things. There's a tshuva that the Avnei Nezer has that we mentioned last week in Orach Chaim in Metav Kuf Mem, where he was asked about a chol sheyesh bo sakana, again, a patient with that was in imminent danger, where the doctor said that this patient was not allowed to fast on Tisha B'Av. The doctors, however, said theoretically you can fast until chatzos, until midday, that shouldn't be an issue. Now, the Avnei Nezer points out that there's absolutely no reason why this person should fast on Tisha B'Av. B'makom choli lo gazru be'rabbanan, that he's a chola. There was no gzeir derbanan. So, firstly, the Avnei Nezer is assuming, like we said before, like the sheet of the Rambam, that Tisha B'Av is not midivrei Kabbalah b'zman hazeh, it's midrabanan. It's ratu misan or ratu eina misan, and we're just more machmir about Tisha B'Av by certain things, but it really has the status of midrabanan. So the Avnei Nezer assumed that, and therefore said, this sick patient, even though he can fast till chatzos, he shouldn't fast till chatzos. He already eats from the morning. The quote from Reb Chaim you can see in the stencils in the Chidushim on Shas in Rosh Hashanah. So he points out that when the Gemara says "Makam choli lo gazru be'rabbanan," that means to tell us that there's no din tainus by this person. So there's not even a chumrah to do. Doesn't make sense to say, you know what, I'll do it anyway. There's no tainus at all in such a case. And that's again that's the opinion of Reb Chaim, who says not to even begin the fast day to start. So the question is, does that apply to, let's say, a doctor who's on a floor, who's in this situation where he's going to have to do a surgery, and he's going to deal with patients who are in imminent danger, who are cholim sheish bo sakana. So in that case, the patient themselves, they don't have a din tainus. But what about the doctor who needs to break his fast eventually because of a sakana? Do we also say b'makom choli lo gazru be'rabbanan, that there's no gzeira of fast, there's no din of a fast day by this doctor? And that's maybe on one hand. On the other hand, as we pointed out in the Sefer Atzfa Behalacha, that the Sefer that they give out for soldiers in the army. So in the 18th parak there, they have a footnote where they ask Rab Shlomo Zalman about soldiers fasting on Yom Kippur. And Rab Shlomo Zalman there said, he went through a bunch of different things. And he said, if it's a regular fast day, so they're considered a chol she'ein bo sakana, and they should begin, and therefore they don't need a fast. Eat, drink, whatever it is. But on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur is a little different. But on Tisha B'Av, he said, if they can just drink without eating, they should drink without eating. If they don't need to eat to gain all their energy and have a clear mind, so then drink and don't eat. In Halicha Shlomo on Yom Kippurim, he also brings this down. So even if Rab Shlomo Zalman thinks that a doctor who's on a floor, again, who should be breaking their fast because they're dealing with patients that are in imminent danger, the question, even if you would assume that they can eat from the beginning, the second question that has to be asked is, should they be eating also with the drinking or only drinking? Again, if they need to eat and drink to get all their energy, so then there's not a question. But for someone who can drink Gatorade or Powerade or whatever it is to gain their energy, and they don't need to eat and they can be fine, so perhaps then on Tisha B'Av, not only question number one is, can I eat from the beginning? Question number two is, do we paskin like the way Shlomo Zalman understands that in such a situation you should only drink and not eat? From the way that I just explained Reb Chaim Soloveitchik before, it seems that it would be hard to say that he agrees to that. It seems like Makom Choli Lo Gazru Be'Rabbanan means that there's no din of tainus, so there'd be no reason to assume why you would only drink and not eat. Now, you're not supposed to eat excessively, but to gain your strength, it would seem to be that would make sense. These are questions that one needs to ask. It happens to be in that footnote also. They call it, Rab Shlomo Zalman says, not only should you only drink, but you shouldn't drink things that are going to sweeten your drink. You shouldn't drink like a lemonade. You should drink water. So presumably Gatorade is included in the water because that you do that to get electrolytes and gain your strength. But these are important questions to ask. Number one, am I in a position where I'm dealing with a patient that could be in imminent danger and therefore I am not allowed to fast? Question number one. Question number two is, if so, do I fast at all? Meaning, or do I start eating already from the beginning of the day? I.e. the Avnei Nezer's case. And question number three is, if I am breaking my fast and I don't need to eat, should I only be drinking or can I eat and drink together? Those are all important questions to ask. Again, as I mentioned before, I'm not giving a halacha. I'm just telling you things that may come up. Okay, that's in terms of fasting. Now, one of the things that make Tisha B'Av unique, obviously, is Ho'el v'Hospelu Wutzaris, and therefore we have Hey Yinuyim, we have the 5 Yinuyim that we have by Yom Kippur. We're not going to discuss all of them, but what we will discuss, we'll start with the Isser of Rechitza, the Isser to wash. So the Gemara Pesachim and Andal, the Gemara and Tainis and Yud Gimel basically come out that there are 3 categories. By a Tainis Tzibor, by a typical fast day, one is not supposed to wash their entire body with hot water. That's point A. Point B is that by an avel, by a mourner, the mourner is not supposed to wash their entire body with hot water, but but they are allowed to wash miktsas gufo, part of their body, with cold water. So again, by Tainis Tzibor, the only thing that's a problem is washing your entire body with hot water. By an avel, so even miktsas bechamin would be a problem. Even part of your body with hot water would be a problem, but cold water with part of your body, that would be okay. When it comes to Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, wherever the Gemara tells us, and the Gemara Moikatan on Tisha B'Av tells us that even miktsas gufo, even part of your body, bitsonan with cold water would also be a problem. Again, even though by an avel, what we want is the person to look a little bit like a minuval, a little bit, disheveled. He's mourning, and therefore we say don't take a hot shower, and even don't use hot water, but you can use cold water. But by Tisha B'Av, there seems to be an additional level, which is that we don't want. It's not just to be novel; it's to be even more than that. There's something about the tightness of Tisha B'Av, like Yom Kippur, and that water is just not allowed. You're not allowed any washing. That's what the Gemara seems to say. And I put here in the source, in the first source, Taf Kuf Nun Dal and Siv Zayin, where the Mechaber writes, Rechitza Asura b'Tisha B'Av, Bein Mecham and Bein Bitzonin, whether hot water or cold water is Asur on Tisha B'Av, Afilu Lahoshit Etzbao B'Mayim, even to place your finger in even cold water, Asur, is definitely a problem, says the Mechaber. The Mishnah Brura. So before that, I should say, so there are exceptions to this rule, as I'm sure we're all aware of. So, for example, in Sif Ches, which I didn't put here, the Mechaber talks about Tefillah Shel Mitzvah. If a woman's Belel Tefillah, so perhaps, and Tefillah Bizman as a mitzvah, so perhaps there would be a heter there to go to the mikvah. Perhaps. I'm not saying one halacha l'maisa. That's what the Mechaber writes. And then in Sif Tes, I put in the second source, the Mechaber writes, if someone's hands were dirty, so mutter lirchotz l'havir halichlach. So you can wash your hands to get rid of the dirt. But v'lo yitol kol yadav, you shouldn't wash your entire hand. El l'fiat tzorech l'havir halichlach. L'fiat tzorech kefiat tzorech, what you need to wash off the dirt. So that would be allowed, says the Mechaber, and why? The Mishnah Brura and Sifkan Yotes tells us, because Eino Asher al Rechitza Shal Tainod. The only rechitza, the only washing that's a problem is when it's a washing that's of tainug, of enjoyment, of feeling good in a certain sense. For if you look back in Siman Taf Kuf Nun Aleph in Sif Tazayin, so the Mechaber there is talking about the 9 days. So we know that many of the minhag already from the 9 days, Ashkenazim have the minhag not to take showers, whatever that means, whether it's a hot shower. Okay, but they're different minhagim, but that's what the Mechaber brings down. So there, the Mishnah Brura and Sifkan Peichas says, but l'refuah, if you need it for purposes of refuah, then it would be mutter. And in his footnotes, the Mishnah Brura writes in the Sha'ar Tzion there, and Sifkan Chavdal writes that l'refuah is in tainug. That if you're doing it for healing purposes, you're not doing it for enjoyment purposes. So the only thing that's usher is when something is done specifically for enjoyment purposes. Now, as an aside, there's a very, very interesting, it seems to be a machlokas in the Rishonim, about how to define what a rechitza shel tanug is, what washing for enjoyment is. For example, if you look at Tosos and Yuma and Ayin Zayin Amid Beis, there's only one Tosos on that daf. So they quote from Rabbeinu Tam that even on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, so we know when we wake up in the morning, so we wash negel vaser. You're supposed to wash netilas yadayim because that's to wash away the ruach ra. For whatever reasons, we do that. But if you look in the Rambam in the 7th parak of Hilchos Tefillah in the 8th halacha, the Rambam writes not to wash negel vaser. So many of the Achronim point out that this seems to be machlokas what rechitza shel tainug is. According to Rabbeinu Tam, anytime I have a reason to wash my hands, whether that's because it's dirty, whether that's because of health, whether that's because of a mitzvah or whatever reason, so that's taken out of the category of just doing it for enjoyment. It's no longer called a rechitza shel tainug. However, according to the Rambam, No, any type of washing your hand is a rechitza shel tanug, and there are two exceptions. The two exceptions are the exceptions the Shulchan Aruch ends up bringing down, which is for tvila, for going to the mikvah, and if there's your yadav meluchlachos, if your hand has dirt on it. Those are the only examples, but anything else would be a rechitza shel tanug. So it seems to be, according to the Rambam, that even if you do it for another reason, and there's maybe a mitzvah to do it or something like that, so then you wouldn't do it. Now, halacha l'mais, it seems to be that we don't agree with the Rambam because we have examples. The Shimmy Shabbos Kilchos, I think, brings down in one of his in one place that let's say if you have to eat on a fast day and you're eating bread, so you wash before you eat bread because it's a mitzvah to wash your hands. So we do think anything that has a purpose to it, we would allow for someone to wash their hands. But according to the Rambam, it does not seem to be the case that because any washing your hands really has a tainug, really has enjoyment in it. Now, obviously, if there's someone in the hospital, they're working in the hospital and they need to wash their hands. So the purpose of washing your hands is to keep your hands clean and disinfected. The purpose is not just to enjoy the water running on your hands, even if you do enjoy it as an aside. But the purpose is for what we would call refuah. And even if you want to say the refuah is not for you, because you don't care that much, it's really for the other person. So then we have no option not to do it anymore. Rav Shechter writes in one of his tshuvas about COVID, again dealing specifically with COVID, that for doctors and nurses on Tisha B'Av they should be washing their hands as disinfect. And he quotes a tshuva of the Chassam Sofer and Chelek Vav in the Likutim there that a woman who's nursing on Yom Kippur, that if she fasts on Yom Kippur, so her milk is going to dry out and the baby's not going to have what to eat. So obviously it's usher for her to fast and she has to eat because it's a sakana for the baby. And what the Chassam Sofer in the post can point out is anytime it's a sakana for someone else, you can't say, no, I don't care that much. It's okay for me. I don't mind fasting. I don't mind not washing my hand. I don't think it's such a problem. I'm not so worried about becoming infected, etc. But you have patients you're dealing with. You have someone else. So you're chayiv to do it because of the sakana for them. So it's obvious that in a hospital, again, whether you're washing your hands or or you're using like a Purell. So Purell is probably more like a sicha, like which is one of the inuyim, lathering or whatever you want to call it, rubbing, anointing. So the Shulchan Aruch and Tav Kuf Nun Daled and Sib Tez Vav already points out that l'refu was mutter for there also. So I mean anything that's not l'tainug. So again, both of these things would clearly indicate that if you're in the hospital and you're working and you're washing your hands or you're putting on Purell for the reason to make sure to stay disinfected because you're dealing with patients, obviously you would be allowed to do it. The question would be if you're in a situation where, let's say, like someone's a radiologist and they're in their dark room all day, and I know that's not all they do, but they're in the room all day looking at imaging. So there's really no heter to wash your hands. If you need to go see a patient, so before he does, he should wash his hands and make sure they're clean. But for rove people who are dealing with actual patients, rove doctors and nurses, they should be washing and cleaning their hands, and there's no isser rechitza in such a case because that's not called the rechitza shel tanug. A or B, even if it is a rechitza shel tanug according to the Rambam, in this case it's sakana for other people, so you have no right to not do it. That's in terms of the Isser Rechitza. One of the questions that was posed, that is often posed, is sitting down on a chair. So questions are posed in two different ways. A, if you have a case where you have let's say a doctor who's feeling weak, so can he sit in a chair? So obviously the answer is there. Yes. The same way if anyone else was feeling too weak to sit on the floor, it was hurting, whatever it is, if they're a chole, so you sit on a chair. That's without an issue. Some of the questions that are posed for some people who are still in school, in medical school or any other school really, and they have class in the morning, can they sit in a chair? So what happens to be what's the source of sitting in a chair? So it doesn't come up in those same halachos in Tav Kuf Nun Daled that the inuyim come up. It comes up later in the Shulchan Aruch and Tav Kuf Nun Tes. So in the Beis Yosef there, they quote from the earlier Achronim and already Rishonim beforehand, that based off the Gemara in Tanis and Lamed Amud Aleph, where the Gemara tells us kol mitzvos hanohagos ba'avel nohagos b'Tisha B'av, that any mitzvah that applies to a mourner applies on Tisha B'av itself. And therefore, since a mourner has an isser to sit on a kisei, to sit on a chair, and they also sit on the floor, so too we do on Tisha B'av. Now, this isn't a shir nachas avelos, but we know b'zman hazeh, the Gesher HaChaim already brings down all these opinions in Parak Chaf of his Sefer, but we know we don't, most of us don't sit on most mourners won't sit on the floor. They'll sit on a chair that's close to the floor. So whatever it is, any of those type of things. But that's what that's what the way the Rishonim bring down. That's where the minhag developed on Tisha B'av, to sit on the floor, or at least right next to the floor, right close to the floor. The Shulchan Aruch brings it down in Siv Gimel there. I brought it down. I brought it here. Leil Tisha B'av v'yomo, on the night of Tisha B'av and the day Yoshim Beis HaKnesses la'aretz atfilas mincha. You sit on the ground until mincha, and then the Ramah adds on. I put in italics va'achshav nagu leishev al sav salehem miyad achar sheyatzim Beis HaKnesses shachris umarichin mimakinos ad ma'kodim chatzos. Okay, so our minhag for many of us, right, for everyone really, we go until chatzos because there was a minhag that the Ramah had to do kinos until chatzos. So you would sit on the floor saying kinos all the way until chatzos, and then after chatzos you can sit on a regular chair. But again, night and morning, because to compare, to make it, to equate it to an avel, to a mourner, so that's where the minhag developed in the Magen Avraham here in Sifkan Beis. It says very clear, this is just a minhag. The minhag is to sit on the floor. So the question that the post can deal with is, what about, let's say, if you're doing public transportation? So you're going on a bus, or you're going in a taxi, I don't know, wherever you're going in an Uber. So are you allowed to, meaning bus is the best example, because theoretically, I guess you could stand. Or are you allowed to, again, before chatzos, are you allowed to sit on the chair in the bus? So in the Sefer Torah HaYoledes, which is one of these farm that they put out for women who are pregnant, giving birth, etc., about all the halachos, it's in conjunction with Rav Zilberstein, and I forgot the doctor's name offhand, but there they have a chapter, the 51st chapter is on like Tisha B'av stuff. So there in a footnote, he quotes from Rav Elyashiv, Zilberstein's father-in-law, that he thought public transportation was totally mutter. It was totally mutter to sit on the bus seat, for example. And he said because the isser to sit on a seat is because it's like tainug. It's comfortable, it's nice. But if you're sitting on a bus, you're sitting because that's just the way you're trying to get from point A to point B. The way is to go on the bus. When you go on the bus, you sit down on the bus. You're not doing it just because it's comfortable for you. That's just the only way it works. In fact, Rav Ephraim Greenblatt has a tshuva, and his tshuva is Rivos Ephraim in our Chaim Chelek Aleph, where he has a tshuva about this. And he quotes, if I remember correctly, that Reb Chaim Kanievsky wrote to him, he asked him about this, and he said Reb Chaim Kanievsky saw the Chazon Ish go into a taxi before Chatzos on Tisha B'av to go to the cemetery to do whatever. So most poskim are mekel. There are those, and I think in the Rivos Ephraim he quotes a gadol who was machmir, but most are mekel. Again, A, it's a minhag, and B, it's only a problem when it's really you're doing it because of comfort. But if you're doing it because that's how you have to travel, that's what you have to do, so that would be okay. Same reason for choli, for refuah purposes, a person's too old, too sick, too weak. And the Mishnah Berurah already points out that they would sit on a chair. Now the question is, what about class? So I don't know the answer. It would seem very hard to find a kula to be able to say it's okay, you can sit on class. You can sit in your desk at class. You either stand or ask if you can sit on the floor, in the back, on the side, on one of the steps, depending if you're in an auditorium. It would seem to be a little hard to find the kula for a class. There really isn't a real concrete reason why that would be okay, other than it looks a little weirder. But I don't think that's a good enough reason. But again, it's something maybe to ask. It would be hard to find the kula. The question, just to end off, the question is, let's say someone is dealing in the hospital, and they're dealing all day, all night and all day. Let's just say, for example, they weren't able to say eicha, they weren't able to really do any kinos. So is there any way to be mekayim avelos? The avelos of Tisha B'av in particular. Is there any way to fulfill that morning? And it's not such a simple answer. The short answer is no. The short answer is you're being osik b'mitzvahs pikuach nefesh shatzalas nefashos, which is an important mitzvah, and unfortunately you can't. There's no real way to go about it. But one of the things, again, I asked my father to ask Rav Asher Weiss when he saw him the other day, is this question: is there anything to do? And he mentioned that if the doctor or nurse really are on the floor and they have a few minutes here and there, so they should take kinos and sit on the floor and read the kinos. That was what he said. I think this would be appropriate even if it was after Chatzos. Again, you're able to say kinos really all day. Even though the Nechama starts at Chatzos, you're able to say kinos all day. If one says kinos, even though after Chatzos we sit in a chair, the post can point out it really comes from the Maharil writes in his Sefer, and Hilchos Tisha B'av and Siman Yadalit, he discusses this. But that you should really be sitting on the floor. It seems to be a bit of a contradiction to say kinos while sitting on a chair. So even if 3 o'clock is the first break you got, so you should have a kinos with you, whether you want to say it in Hebrew and English or whatever. Sit on the floor for 3 minutes and say a kina. That would probably be the most appropriate way, at least get something out of the day to try to feel something, to try to have some avelos on the Churban. We weren't able to get through everything, but these were definitely important things to think about, to ask about. The fasting, the washing, the sicha, the anointing, and sitting on a chair. The niyas sandal is one of the other questions that comes up. We're not going to discuss it. There's no real Bisman Hazeh, it's very hard. It's not real discussion. There's so many types of shoes that you can wear. I don't have Crocs, but everyone always tells me they're super comfortable. Like, there are things that are very easy to wear, so there'd be no real heter to wear leather shoes. Bisman Hazeh, even if you're working on the floor all day, you have other options. So that's why I chose not to discuss that. But there are other things that may come up, but those I think are the main ideas that come up for someone who's working in the hospital in healthcare on Tisha B'Av. Thank you very much for inviting me again. And if anyone has any questions, I'm open to it. Great.
I'm going to have one question, I guess, if no one else has. So, Rabbi Steinmetz, you didn't really discuss this at all. I mean, maybe this is just piggybacking off your previous year, but in terms of ending the fast also, like earlier, all this one you discussed in the previous year, is that also relevant here, or is it a little bit different for Tisha B'Av?
Yeah, yes, it's a question that could be asked. It would depend on a few things. Firstly, it would depend on what I started with, which is whether Tisha B'Av is midivrei Kabbalah or midivrei Rabbanan. Only if it's midivrei Rabbanan can we even start the question. But let's say it is. So again, the 41 and 50 minutes, Rav Moshe already thinks that's okay. So you could theoretically end 41 minutes without an issue. The question that we discussed is about Tisha B'Av. So the Gemara that we discussed last week, the reason why they're able to prove that that maybe by the fast days it would end at Shkia is because the Gemara asks about Tisha B'Av by Ben Hashmashos. And the question is is it the Ben Hashmashos beforehand or at the end? But if you assume it's at the end, then the Gemara's conclusion seems to be by Tisha B'Av, it would have to end after Ben Hashmashos. So that's one of the chumras of Tisha B'Av, that you would not be able to do it earlier. Again, based off that Gemara. There are ways to get around it if you would assume that Gemara is really asking about the Ben Hashmashos at the beginning of the day, and you would hold that Tisha B'Av is all midrabanan, then there would be a way to combine that to say maybe I can end earlier already at Shkia. But again, if you're going to assume one, you can't assume the other. So if we assume that really it's talking about the end Ben Hashmashos, that is the Gemara's question, and the Gemara says you have to go through all of Ben Hashmashos.